the Kansas plain didn't forgive. It just waited. Clara Whitmore had learned that, in the 3 years since she buried her husband, Daniel, under the old cottonwood at the edge of their property, she had driven the spade herself because the ranch hands had all gone. One by the war, one by the bottle, one by a better offer 3 counties east. She had wrapped his hands in his good Sunday shirt, because the ground was hard, and she hadn't wanted the dirt to touch his skin before she was ready to let go. She wasn't ready. She did it anyway. That was what the frontier asked of a woman. That she do the thing she wasn't ready for. The farm now was hers. Every cracked board, every stubborn acre of sorghum, every chicken that refused to lay unless she spoke to them by name, 40 acres of dry earth that produced just enough to keep her from having to sesca and just little enough to keep her awake at night. She was 34 years old, lean as a fence post, with hands that had stopped looking like a woman's hands somewhere around the second winter alone. She kept her dark hair pinned tight under a wide-brimmed hat when she worked, which was always as. She had almost moved on. That was the cruelest part, not the grief itself, which was large and known and could be measured. But, the moment she had realized, 3 weeks ago, that she'd gone an entire morning without thinking of Daniel, she had stood at the kitchen window with a coffee cup going cold in her hand, and felt something that wasn't quite guilt, and wasn't quite relief. Something in between those two things, that had no clean name. She had almost moved on. Then the rider came. She saw him before she heard him, which was the only warning she got. It was a Wednesday morning in late October, the kind of pale, colorless mornings that smelled like iron and coming rain. Clara was mending the fence line along the south pasture when the shape appeared at the far end of the road. A single horse, moving at a deliberate walk, trailing dust behind it like a slow accusation. She straightened, set her hammer down against the post, watched. There was something wrong in the way the horse moved. Not the horse itself, the animal was big, a dark bay with good legs, but the way it carried its rider. Slumped, one hand gripping the saddle horn like a man gripping the edge of a cliff. She started walking toward the road. By the time the rider reached her gate, she could see the blood. Dark stain, spreading from his left side, soaking through a shirt that might once have been blue. His hat was gone. His face, when he looked up at her, was the color of creek water after a storm. He was older than she remembered. His hair had gone half gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But the jaw was the same. The set of the mouth was the same. The particular way he looked at her, like he was calculating something and ashamed of the calculation, that was entirely, specifically the same. "Clara," said Jesse Caine. She stood at the gate with her hand on the post and did not move. Jesse Caine, the man who had ridden south with Daniel in the spring of 1861 and come back alone in the fall, who had sat at her kitchen table and told her about Shiloh in a voice so flat and careful it sounded like a man reading figures from a ledger, had held her hand across the table until she pulled it away, and then sat there anyway, not knowing what to do with his own hands, who had left 3 months after that. Said he couldn't stay, said the land reminded him, said things that men say when the truth is too complicated to fit inside clean words. Who had not written, not once, not in 3 years. "You look like hell," she said. "I've been worse," he said. Then he fell off the horse. She didn't leave him in the road. That was a choice she made consciously, standing over him while the bay horse stood patiently beside her and the morning light stretched long across the dry grass. She could have left him. The thought arrived clean and unsentimental, and she looked at it honestly for a count of 3. Then she bent down and got her hands under his arms. She dragged him to the porch. She was strong enough. 3 years of solitary farm work had seen to that, and he had lost enough blood that he wasn't as heavy as he should have been. She got him inside, got him onto the kitchen table because the bedroom was too far, cut his shirt away with her sewing scissors and found the wound. Bullet. In and out, by the look of it, but torn and dirty and already running with fever heat. She'd treated worse on cattle. She told herself that as she heated the poker and poured the whiskey and did what needed doing while Jesse Caine gripped the table edge, and didn't make a sound that she would have called a scream. Though it was close. When it was done, she sat down across from him and looked at the ceiling. "Who shot you?" she said. "Not a question. A starting place." He breathed for a while before he answered. "Marlowe's men." She brought her eyes down from the ceiling. "Thomas Marlowe." She knew the name the way everyone in Barton County knew it, like you knew the name of a drought or a disease. Land agent turned land thief. He had been buying up farms along the river valley for 2 years, and when buying didn't work he used other methods. 3 families had sold at his price after finding their wells salted. One man, old Hector Reyes, had not sold and had been found face down in his own irrigation ditch. The sheriff in Dodge said it was an accident. "What do you have to do with Marlowe?" Clara said. Jess closed his eyes. "I've been working for the army. Scout work, mostly. They sent me out here because Marlowe's been selling land grants he doesn't own. Federal land, Apache territory. He's got a deal with a railroad man in Kansas City. They've been moving on the bands in the Cimarron corridor. Pushing them where?" He opened his eyes. "Here," he said. "North. There are 5 Apache bands, maybe 1,000 people, moving north ahead of Marlowe's hired guns. Pushed off land that was promised to them. They're moving fast and they're hungry and they're angry enough that there's going to be blood somewhere before long." He paused. "I was supposed to meet a colonel out of Fort Dodge 2 days ago. Marlowe found out." Clara sat very still. "How long?" she said. "Before they reach this valley." He looked at the window. Outside, the morning had gone the color of old bone. "They were 2 days south of the Cimarron when I left. Moving fast. I'd say by nightfall." The kitchen was very quiet. 1,000 people, she said, roughly. She stood up, went to the window, looked out at her 40 acres, the sorghum fields, the grain stores, the root cellar packed with the winter harvest she had spent 3 months putting by out. Enough to see one woman through one winter, if she was careful. Not enough for 1,000 people. Not nearly enough. She sent Jesse to the bedroom, he argued. She pointed at the door, with the expression that had, over 3 years, learned how to end arguments, and he went. Then she sat at the kitchen table and thought. The problem was not simple but it was clear, and Clara had always thought better, with clear problems. There were 3 things happening at once. 1,000 Apache men, women, and children were moving north, hungry and pressed, and would reach this valley by nightfall. Thomas Marlowe's hired guns were somewhere to the south, driving them, and had already tried to kill the only army contact she knew of, and the colonel Jesse was supposed to meet was 2 days late to an appointment, which meant he either didn't know what was happening or had been stopped from knowing. She needed to reach the fort, she needed to feed the people who were coming, and she needed to do both before Marlowe's men arrived. She had 1 horse. She had 40 acres of sorghum and a root cellar. She had a Winchester rifle she hadn't fired in 8 months, and a shotgun that was reliable at close range. She had a farmhand, Tomas, a quiet young man from Sonora, who slept in the barn and worked for share wages, who was currently in the south field and didn't yet know any of this. She put on her hat and went to find Tomas. He was 18 and serious, and had a younger brother back in Sonora. He sent half his wages to every month. When she told him what was coming, his face didn't change, which was one of the things she valued about him. "Can you ride to Fort Dodge?" she said. "Yes ma'am, hard ride, all day." "Yes ma'am. Tell them Jesse Caine is here. Tell them about Marlowe, tell them about the bands." She hesitated. "Tell them a widow farmer on the Pawnee River Road is going to try to hold things together until they get here, and that they should hurry." Tomas looked at her for a moment. "That is what you're going to do? Hold things together? Somebody has to." He nodded slowly. "My brother," he said. "He always says the bravest people are the ones who have nothing left to be afraid of losing." He looked at the cottonwood at the edge of the property where the wooden marker stood. "I don't think that's you, ma'am. I think you have things to lose. I think you're just brave anyway." Clara cleared her throat. "Take the bay," she said. "He's rested. Go now." They came at midday, which she hadn't expected. 3 men on horseback, riding slow and deliberate up the south road, with that particular unhurried arrogance of men who were accustomed to people getting out of their way. She watched them from the front porch, rifle leaned against the door frame, her hands loose at her sides. The one in front was big, not fat, but layered. Like something that had been compressed under pressure. He had a deputy's badge that had no business on his chest and a smile that had even less. She had never seen him before, but she knew exactly what he was. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, reining up at her gate. "Looking for a man. Army scout, goes by Jesse Caine, wounded. Rode north from the Cimarron yesterday. Don't know him," Clara said. The man's smile didn't change, but his eyes did something. Recalculated. "That's his horse in your barn, ma'am. Bought that horse 2 weeks ago off a trader in Dodge. Don't know who owned it before. Mind if we look around?" "I mind very much," Clara said, and picked up the rifle. Not raised it, just picked it up, barrel toward the ground, her thumb near the hammer. A declaration. "This is private property. You've got no warrant, and that badge didn't come from any sheriff I recognize, so you'll ride back the way you came or I'll put a hole in that gatepost to show you where the property line is." The man looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, one of his companions shifted in his saddle and his horse stamped. "There are people coming, ma'am," the big man said, in a different tone now, quieter, almost conversational. "Apache. Hundreds of them. You don't want to be here when they arrive." "Then it's lucky I know how to cook," Clara said. He stared at her, she looked back. The sky behind the three men was the color of a bruise, heavy and low, pressing down on the flat land like a hand. The big man looked at the rifle. Looked at her face, looked back at the rifle. "We'll be back," he said. "I expect you will," Clara said. "But not today." They turned and rode south. She watched them until they were small and then gone, and then she allowed herself to exhale, slowly, through her nose. Her hands were shaking. She set the rifle against the doorframe again and pressed her palms flat against her thighs until they stopped. Then she went back inside to start cooking. They came at dusk, as Jesse had said they would. Clara was standing in the yard when the first shapes appeared at the southern edge of her land. Emerging from the long shadows of the prairie grass. Like people stepping through a curtain, a woman first, carrying a child on her back, moving with the specific careful efficiency of someone who has been walking for a very long time. Then more. Then many more. They spread across the approaching dark like a slow tide. Clara had spent the afternoon cooking everything she had, both iron pots on the stove. The outdoor fire pit stacked high and burning. Every sack of grain from the root cellar hauled out and split open. She had killed 4 of her chickens, had stood in the yard and made herself do it without sentiment because sentiment was a luxury, and put them in the pot. She had baked 7 rounds of cornbread in batches. The kitchen sweltering, sweat running down her face. Jesse had appeared in the kitchen doorway mid-afternoon, pale and moving carefully, and she'd handed him a knife and pointed at the vegetable stores without a word, and he'd understood and started working beside her. They hadn't talked much. There was too much to do for talking. Now she stood in the yard with the firelight behind her, and watched the Apache bands arrive on her land and tried to understand the scale of what she was seeing. It was one thing to say 1,000 people, it was another thing to see them, families, elders, children, young men with hard faces and tired eyes, women who looked at her with an expression she recognized, because she wore it herself, the expression of someone who had been managing an impossible situation for longer than they should have had to. A man approached her, older, with deep, set eyes, and a face like weathered stone, walking with the careful authority of someone accustomed to having things depend on him. He stopped, a few feet from her, and they looked at each other. Clara gestured toward the fire, toward the pots, toward the spread of food she had laid out on every flat surface she owned, including the barn doors, taken off their hinges and laid across sawhorses. The man looked at it, looked at her. Something moved through his expression that she didn't have a name for. He spoke. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the tone of someone who has been surprised by something they had stopped expecting. "You're welcome here," Clara said. "All of you. What I have is yours tonight." It was deep in the night when Marlowe's men returned. Clara heard the horses first. Too many, moving too fast, coming up the road from the south with no attempt at quiet. She stood up from the fire where she'd been sitting with 3 Apache women who were teaching her a hand game she didn't understand and went for the Winchester. There were 12 of them. She could see that in the firelight, 12 armed men on horseback at the edge of her property, the big one in the lead, and whatever calculation he'd made at noon had clearly come out differently in the dark. She walked out to meet them alone. "Stand down, ma'am," the big man said. His voice had lost its conversational quality. "This doesn't have to go badly for you." "You're on my land," Clara said. 12 armed men on my land after dark. That's how it goes badly for you." She was aware, without looking, of movement behind her. The young Apache men, the ones with the hard faces and tired eyes, had risen from where they'd been sitting. She could feel them at her back, not behind her like a threat but beside her like a fact. Standing where she was standing, facing what she was facing, the big man looked past her at the gathered figures silhouetted against the firelight. For the first time, something in his face shifted from arrogance to calculation, and then from calculation to a kind of uncertainty. "This isn't your fight," he said to her. "You're wrong about that," Clara said. "This is my land, these are my guests, that makes it entirely my fight." The standoff held for a count of seconds that felt much longer. Then, from the north road, came the sound of cavalry. It came first as a tremor through the ground. Hoofbeats, many of them, organized and rhythmic, the particular sound of military horses moving at a disciplined pace. Then the shapes emerged from the dark. Riders in blue, torches held high, a column of 50 soldiers coming down the Pawnee River Road, with a colonel at the head, and Tomas riding beside him looking exhausted, proud, and like someone who had done exactly what he'd set out to do. The big man looked at the soldiers, looked at Clara, looked at the people gathered on her land, then he turned his horse around and rode south, and his men rode with him. And the dark swallowed them one by one. Clara lowered the rifle. Her legs, she noticed distantly, were shaking again. The soldiers set up camp on the east side of her property. The colonel, a neat, serious man named Hargrave, who had the look of someone perpetually disappointed in the situation he found himself in, sat at her kitchen table at midnight and listened to Jesse lay out everything he knew about Marlowe, the railroad deal, the land grants, the pushed bands, the salted wells. He made notes in a small book. He asked precise questions. He looked at Clara twice with an expression she couldn't read. When Jesse was done, Hargrave closed his notebook and said, "We'll have warrants by morning. Marlowe won't run far. He's got powerful friends in Kansas City," Jesse said. "He had powerful friends," Hargrave said. "Until he started shooting at Army scouts." He stood, put his hat on, looked at Clara. "Ma'am, what you did tonight took considerable nerve." "What I did tonight was cook," Clara said. Hargrave looked at her for a moment and then unexpectedly smiled. "Yes ma'am, I suppose it was." He went out. Clara and Jesse were alone in the kitchen. The fire had burned low. Outside the prairie had gone quiet in the way it went quiet after something large had passed through. Not empty, but resting. From across the yard, she could hear low voices, the sound of children sleeping, the occasional movement of horses. 3 years of solitary nights had taught her every sound this land made, when it was hers, alone. Tonight it sounded different, fuller, somehow. Jess was sitting where he'd always sat. Across the table, slightly sideways, the way a man sits when he's not sure he has the right to be fully present somewhere. His color was better. He'd stopped bleeding sometime around sunset, which she'd taken as a good sign. "You were going to leave again," she said, "after this." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what I was going to do." "That's an answer, Clara. You left because you felt guilty," she said. Not unkindly, as a statement of a thing that had been known for a long time and simply never spoken. "Because you came back from Shiloh and Daniel didn't, because every time you looked at me you saw that." He didn't deny it. "I'm not going to tell you that wasn't fair to me," Clara said, "because it wasn't. 3 years, not a word." She looked at her hands on the table. The rough, capable hands that had dug a grave and mended fences and dragged a bleeding man off a road and fed 1,000 people and faced down 12 armed riders without flinching. "But, I'm also not going to tell you to leave. I'm tired of telling people to leave when what I mean is something else." Jess looked at her across the table. The fire popped once, softly. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean," Clara said, "that there is a room in this house that has been empty for 3 years and I am tired of being practical about it." She met his eyes. I mean that you owe me 3 years of letters, at minimum. I mean that if you're going to be here, be here. And if you're not, then go now tonight, before I get used to you again. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, across her 40 acres, 1,000 people breathed and slept and woke in turns, carrying their own histories and losses across land that had tried to swallow them, resting now in the temporary shelter of one woman's stubbornness. Come morning, the colonel would ride south, with warrants. Come morning, the Apache bands would move to proper council with the army, and the agreements that should have been honored would begin the slow process of being honored. Come morning, Marlowe would discover that the railroad deal had collapsed, and that his powerfuls had become, overnight, men who had never heard his name. Come morning, Clara would begin the inventory of everything she had given away, and figure out how to get through a winter on what remained. But that was morning. Jesse Caine reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She didn't pull it away. Outside, the Kansas plains stretched in every direction, dark and flat and enormous. The kind of landscape that made people feel small, that had swallowed so many stories and asked for more. Clara had always understood, in the way you understand things that live in your chest rather than your head, that the frontier didn't care about you. It didn't promise anything. It didn't protect you from loss or loneliness, or the men who would take what wasn't theirs, but it also didn't stop you. That was the thing people forgot. The land was hard and the land was indifferent, but it also got out of the way. It let you be exactly as strong as you were willing to be. It let you feed 1,000 people on a harvest meant for one. It let you stand at your gate, with a rifle, and mean it. It let you sit at a kitchen table in the small hours and say the honest thing finally, after 3 years of silence, because the land didn't punish honesty. It just watched. Clara Whitmore had almost moved on. Instead, she held a man's hand in the low firelight, while outside her door, the world rearranged itself into something that might, with enough stubbornness and enough cooking and enough courage, become livable. The dawn, when it came slowly. The way good things do.